I grew up as the quiet one in my family, which is a polite way of saying I was treated like background furniture. Useful, unobtrusive, and never worth listening to unless someone needed an extra chair. My name is Eleanor. I'm the younger sibling. That fact alone seemed to settle the hierarchy permanently. My brother Daniel, on the other hand, entered every room like a press release. Daniel had opinions, projections, instincts. Daniel read business books the way some people read horoscopes, and then spoke as if the universe itself had personally confirmed his genius. Family dinners became his preferred TED Talk venue. He'd lean back, swirl his drink, and explain markets to people who hadn't asked, correcting my parents with a patience usually reserved for slow children. I worked in finance too. This detail rarely survived past the appetizer. Whenever someone asked what I did, Daniel would jump in first. "She does analysis stuff," he'd say, waving his fork vaguely in my direction. Very detail-oriented. Not really leadership material, but someone's gotta crunch the numbers. He said it kindly, the way you compliment a well-trained dog. I learned early that disagreeing with him only made things worse. Daniel didn't argue, he lectured. He'd smile while dismantling you, then act wounded if you didn't applaud. So I stopped pushing back. I nodded. I asked questions that made him talk longer. I let him feel like the sun and learned how to grow quietly in the shade. What my family didn't know, what Daniel never once thought to ask, was that I'd been building something of my own for a decade. Not loudly, not on social media. No motivational quotes, no panel appearances, no breathless announcements about disruption. Just work. Long, meticulous, deeply boring work that compounds beautifully if you let it. I founded a small investment firm right out of graduate school. I gave it a forgettable name on purpose, Alderstone Capital, the kind of name that disappears into paperwork. I started with conservative clients who valued consistency over flash, pension funds, family offices that had survived 3 recessions and didn't feel the need to brag about it. I reinvested fees, I hired slowly, I fired quickly. I never trusted instinct when data would do. 10 years later, Alderstone managed just north of $300 million. I still drove the same car. I still wore clothes that blended into conference rooms. I still showed up to holidays with a bottle of wine and no stories. Daniel noticed none of this. What he did notice, what he loved, was his own ascent. He talked about deals he was circling, people he was mentoring, mistakes he'd outgrown. He described risk the way gamblers describe luck, something that favored the bold. Every success was proof of his brilliance. Every failure was someone else's incompetence. The best part, for him, was having an audience. He liked to tease me about being cautious. "You play not to lose," he told me once, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "I play to win." Everyone laughed. I smiled and took a sip of my drink. Inside, I made a note to rebalance a portfolio that had just crossed another quiet milestone. There's a particular freedom in being underestimated. People stop watching you closely. They stop guarding themselves. They say things out loud they shouldn't. They make plans, assuming you're irrelevant to them. Daniel made a lot of plans. Big ones. Loud ones. He started talking about launching his own firm, about proving he didn't need anyone, about finally showing the world how real money was made. He talked about it the way a man talks about a boat he hasn't built yet, already picturing the champagne. I listened. I asked him how he planned to structure it, who he trusted, what kind of capital he wanted. He thought I was curious because I was impressed. I was curious because I like to know where people are stepping before the ground gives way. At the time, I don't think he ever considered that I might be ahead of him. Not just a little ahead, not catching up, already there, already done, already patient. That was fine by me. Being invisible is a skill, and I had gotten very, very good at it. Daniel launched his firm the way some people announce engagements, prematurely and at full volume. He called it Ironclad Ventures, which told you everything you needed to know about how he saw himself. Invincible, decisive, destined. He rented office space that looked impressive from the street and useless from the inside. All glass and echo, the kind of place that photographs better than it functions. He raised $200 million in a way that looked effortless if you didn't know what you were looking at. Old favors, loud promises, a few anchor investors who liked his confidence more than his numbers. He told anyone who would listen that capital followed vision. He said it like a law of physics. What he never said out loud was who made that capital possible. Alderstone Capital, my quiet little firm with the forgettable name, participated early. We structured it through a stack of entities that did exactly what they were designed to do: remain boring. By the time Ironclad Ventures finished its triumphant first close, Alderstone controlled just over 80% of the voting shares. Not economically flashy, just decisive. The kind of ownership you don't feel until you really, really do. Daniel invited me to the launch party out of courtesy. He introduced me to people as his sister, who kept him grounded. I watched him work the room, telling stories about risk and instinct, about how spreadsheets were useful but ultimately limited. I noticed how often he said, "I felt," and how rarely he said, "we tested." The first 3 months were a masterclass in confidence untethered from reality. Daniel chased headlines instead of fundamentals. He pushed money into companies with charismatic founders and unfinished products. He loved first movers, even when they were sprinting toward cliffs. When analysts raised concerns, he waved them off. When partners suggested caution, he reframed it as fear. He lost $47 million before the quarter ended. He explained it away beautifully: market volatility, temporary pullbacks, strategic positioning. He spoke with the serene authority of a man who believed belief itself was a hedge. The board listened, uneasy but polite. They wanted to trust him. No one enjoys admitting they've backed the wrong horse, especially when that horse is still talking. Then came the cryptocurrency play. Daniel had found a startup overseas, opaque, unregulated, and promising returns that bent the laws of arithmetic. He brought it to the board like a revelation. $30 million. Fast in, fast out. He used words like inevitable and once in a generation. When the compliance team flagged it, he called them unimaginative. When the board asked for more diligence, he accused them of paralysis. They voted it down. Unanimously. Daniel did not accept this. He tried to push it through anyway, rerouting funds through a subsidiary, disguising the transaction as a short-term liquidity maneuver. Sloppy, frankly. The kind of move made by someone who had never had to clean up their own messes. He assumed speed would save him. He assumed no one would look too closely. He assumed authority was something you declared. I found out because systems talk, even when people don't. A compliance alert crossed my desk late one night, flagged as low priority, the kind of thing most executives skim past. I didn't skim. I followed it. I traced the transaction path and felt that familiar cold clarity settle in. Not anger, not triumph, just confirmation. Daniel was no longer reckless. He was fraudulent. The board chairman called me the next morning, voice tight, careful with every word. He spoke to me like an advisor, not knowing he was speaking to the person who could end the conversation with a sentence. He wanted guidance. He wanted reassurance. He wanted to know how bad it really was. I told him the truth, that it was worse than he thought, that delaying action would compound the damage. That governance existed for a reason, and ignoring it only made the reckoning louder. He thanked me. He had no idea why my advice carried so much weight. He only knew that it did. Daniel, meanwhile, was still posting about vision, still talking about boldness, still mistaking motion for progress. He called me that evening, giddy, convinced he was on the brink of something historic. He told me I should be proud of him. I told him I was watching closely. He laughed, assuming I meant as a sister. That was the last easy laugh he'd have for a while. Daniel chose excess for his wedding. It fit the brand. A vineyard hours outside the city, imported flowers, a string quartet that looked bored by its own excellence. Everything gleamed. Everything cost too much. The kind of event designed to signal arrival rather than commitment. I arrived early, as usual. I wore something neutral and unremarkable, something that would never appear in photos anyone cared about. Daniel hugged me with one arm, already scanning the crowd over my shoulder. He was glowing, convinced this day marked the moment his life tipped permanently into legend. New firm, new marriage, new chapter. He looked like a man who thought consequences were for later drafts. The ceremony was beautiful in a technically flawless way, vows spoken clearly, applause timed just right. I clapped with everyone else, smiling softly, performing the role I'd rehearsed for years. Proud sister, quiet observer, safe furniture. My phone vibrated during the reception, tucked against the table leg where no one could see. One vibration, then another, then a call. I excused myself and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The board chairman's voice came through thin and strained. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. He told me they'd uncovered the transaction, the crypto deal, the shell accounts, the false descriptions. He said the words carefully, like they might detonate if handled roughly. He asked what he should do. I leaned against the stone wall and watched the lights from the reception shimmer across the vineyard. Laughter drifted through the open doors. Daniel's laugh carried above the rest, confident and untroubled. I told the chairman exactly what governance required. Immediate action, emergency meeting, full disclosure. I told him delay would only implicate more people. I told him that whatever happened next had to happen fast and clean. There was a pause. Then he asked the question he'd been circling since the beginning. Do you have the authority to support this? I smiled to myself, not out of joy, but recognition. The moment had arrived, right on schedule. Yes, I said, I do. The emergency board meeting was set for the next morning. Daniel knew nothing. He danced, he toasted, he gave a speech about partnership and trust, about how success meant sharing the spotlight. I watched him raise his glass, utterly certain of the ground beneath his feet. The next morning, the conference room was full and silent. Daniel arrived late, annoyed more than concerned, adjusting his cufflinks as he took his seat at the head of the table. He cracked a joke about scheduling meetings during wedding weekends. No one laughed. The chairman opened with procedure, findings, numbers, evidence laid out cleanly, methodically. Daniel's expression shifted from irritation to disbelief to offense. He interrupted often, pushing back, reframing, insisting it was a misunderstanding, a temporary maneuver, a visionary play slowed by timid oversight. When the chairman finished, he turned to me. Eleanor, he said, voice steady, as the majority voting shareholder, would you like to address the board? Daniel's head snapped toward me. Confusion flickered across his face, quickly masked by a scoff. Majority shareholder? He said, laughing lightly. That's funny. I stood. The chair scraped softly against the floor. Every eye in the room followed me, some curious, some already wary. I placed a folder on the table and slid it forward. I founded Alderstone Capital 10 years ago, I said. We manage a diversified portfolio focused on long-term stability and governance-first investment. Daniel stared at me, still smiling, waiting for the punchline. Alderstone Capital owns 81% of Ironclad Ventures voting shares, I continued. We acquired them during the initial raise, quietly, legally, transparently. The smile fell away. I opened the folder and distributed copies. Ownership structures, signatures, dates. There was nothing theatrical about it. No raised voice, no flourish. Just facts doing what facts always do when they're finally allowed into the room. Daniel stood up, red creeping into his face. He accused me of betrayal, of manipulation, of hiding behind technicalities. He talked faster as his arguments thinned, reaching for emotion when logic refused to cooperate. I let him finish. Then I spoke again, softer this time. I explained the fraudulent transaction, the board's explicit rejection, the attempt to bypass controls. I explained fiduciary duty, using the same patient tone he'd once used on me at dinner tables. The vote was swift, removal as CEO, immediate suspension of decision-making authority, referral to legal counsel, damage control already in motion. Daniel sank back into his chair, stunned. He looked around the table for allies and found none. For the first time in his life, confidence had nothing left to cling to. As the meeting adjourned, the chairman thanked me. Board members avoided Daniel's eyes as they filed out. He stayed seated, staring at the table like it had personally wronged him. I gathered my things and paused beside him. I never wanted to embarrass you, I said quietly. I wanted you to stop. He didn't respond. He couldn't. I walked out of the room without looking back. The building felt different now, quieter, balanced, like something unstable had finally been set down properly. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent as ever. I took a deep breath and felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not victory, relief. Daniel didn't call me afterward. Not that day, not the next. The silence felt deliberate, like a door slammed not to keep me out, but to give him something solid to lean against while everything else collapsed. News traveled the way it always does in those circles. quickly, selectively, and with just enough distortion to protect the people telling it. By the end of the week, everyone knew he was stepping away. By the end of the month, everyone knew he'd been forced out. The details blurred, but the conclusion stuck. His firm survived. Smaller, cauterized, boring again. The way healthy things often are. I heard about Daniel secondhand. Friends who didn't know what to say told me he was angry. Others told me he was embarrassed. Someone said he was doing a lot of thinking, which is what people say when thinking is the only remaining option. He sold the vineyard photos. He stopped posting. He stopped talking. At a family dinner weeks later, the air felt heavier, like furniture had been rearranged without anyone acknowledging it. My parents were careful with their words, cautious in a way they'd never been with me before. They asked about my work and actually listened to the answer. My mother nodded slowly, as if reprocessing years of assumptions all at once. Daniel didn't come. I didn't gloat. There was no urge. Watching someone lose a mask isn't satisfying the way movies suggest. It's quieter, sadder. You realize how much of their identity was built for an audience that's already wandered off. What stayed with me wasn't the boardroom or the reveal, or even the look on his face when the ground vanished. It was how ordinary everything felt afterward. The markets opened, emails came in, portfolios needed rebalancing. Consequences, once delivered, are remarkably uninterested in drama. I went back to work. Alderstone kept growing, steadily, predictably. The kind of growth that never trends but never panics either. New clients came on, many because they'd watched how the situation was handled. Quiet competence attracts a certain kind of trust, the kind that lasts. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about all the dinners, all the little dismissals, all the times I'd been spoken over and waved aside. I realized something then that surprised me. Those moments hadn't weakened me. They'd trained me, taught me patience, precision, the value of letting people reveal themselves fully before they're interrupted by reality. Daniel eventually sent a message, short, careful. He said he wished things had gone differently. He said he hadn't known. He said a lot of things that hovered just shy of responsibility. I replied politely, briefly, honestly. I told him I hoped he'd learn something useful. I told him I wished him well, and I meant it. Being underestimated had given me room to build a life without noise. It had let me choose substance over spectacle, structure over instinct. It had kept my name off banners and my hands on levers that actually mattered. Some people need to be seen to feel real. Others just need the work to hold. I never corrected anyone who still thought I was the quiet one. I never clarified how much I managed or how far my reach extended. Let them keep their story. It costs me nothing now. There's a particular peace that comes from knowing exactly who you are, even when no one else bothers to look, especially then.